Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of our podcast, Unpacking Organizations, where Rupert and I talk about our passion topics and stories from our our professional lives. And now in this season, we have guests joining us each of these episodes. So, Rupert, first of all, hello, how are you?
Hi, hi from. We always do chit chat at the beginning, and the only thing we ever chit chat about is the weather. We have to get our conversation down to something more interesting than the weather. But
I know.
so the weather is very sunny here for a couple of days, which we're getting the sun for the year now.
That is fantastic. It's always nice. Sun is always nice in London. Well, things are amazing in the other side of the pond as well.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
And Rupert, why don't you introduce our guest for today?
Great pleasure to introduce Jordan Pettman, who I've known for a number of years now, quite a few years. I think we go back, might even be 10 years, Jordan, but
I'd say it's something like that, yeah.
yeah,
Maybe
Mhm.
longer.
maybe longer, but not as long as another family member of mine. So, for the listeners that don't know, I'm one of five boys. I've got four brothers, and one of my brothers, his name is Marcus, who's quite a character. I think you'd agree, Jordan. Worked with Jordan back in
Gosh,
2007.
Marcus and we both worked for a little company called Inform before I'd moved to the UK, in fact. So as we worked together, he was based in London, I was based in Brisbane. And so the only times we were together, we were probably doing less working and maybe a little more drinking of the wine. But if you hang out with
The
a
best
Morrison
times.
brother, it's inevitable, right?
It is inevitable. He was based in Brisbane for a while as well, actually, with Inform.
Yeah.
It was stunning, and then came to London. Had him for a few years here before he went back to New Zealand. So, to Marcus, honorary call to my brother and giving Jordan a hug. You survived it.
We did, just about. Just about. Still kicking.
How cool.
Yeah.
How cool.
So, um, beyond all that family history, which 99.9% of our listeners won't give a monkey's about, um, but they will give a monkey about, or they will care about your history. So, just being, apart from working with Marcus at Inform in Brisbane way back,
What else
Jordan,
brought me to this
what
grand
else?
stage?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Good question. So I guess I have pieces of paper that say that I went and learned about psychology and about business, specifically people strategy and strategic HRM, um, adult education and assessment, and most recently career coaching. So, kind of quite a varied educational background, I suppose, and fell into the world of OP&A or strategic workforce planning and people analytics, depending on which school you were educated in as to what label you give them. Um, fell into it in Brisbane. I was working as a learning consultant for a big health insurer. Went to school and two of the professors that I was studying with worked for Inform, where Marcus was already working. And they said, Jordan, you write these papers that you're submitting for marking in the same way that we give our CPO clients as we're telling them how they should structure their workforce and what kind of strategy they need to meet organizational outcomes across the next 5 years. So you should stop working and learning and come and work with us. And the rest, as they say, is history. So I spent very many years in consulting with Inform. Inform was acquired. Inform built a piece of technology to support our consulting practice. We were acquired by SuccessFactors, who was then acquired by SAP. And so I've survived multiple acquisitions. Moved into IBM consulting as well. And then about 10 years ago, about this time, I was approached by Nestle to move to Switzerland, learn how to speak French, and start their global OP&A capability. We called it our people analytics team. And started with a very small team with a very finite remit of getting our data set in working order, and ended up where that team today is about 60 people in a direct reporting line and nearer to about 300 people across the total Nestle organization out in the rest of the world. So that was exciting, getting to build a total piece of capability from scratch. And then did the same thing at the London Stock Exchange Group. And then when I decided I wanted to become a career coach, I stepped out of corporate life and into the dark side of consulting again at Insight 222. Insight 222 focuses on supporting heads of people analytics, whatever that people analytics remit happens to be, whether it includes organization design and strategic workforce planning and operational planning, or if it's a narrower kind of lean, mean data science machine and their chief people officers. Our mission is really to support those leaders to get businesses to put the use of people analytics at the center of the way they make business decisions, which is exciting. It means that I got to step back out and I work with lots of people who like to talk about all the same nerdy things that I like to talk about, and support them to work with each other across organizations to learn from each other's mistakes and learn how to accelerate to better business outcomes, which is it's a nice place to get to play.
It's a great place to play. And we were discussing one of the things you're most passionate about is, and I'm sure you haven't coined the term, but IBT. You told me you like to out TLA me, out three-letter acronym me. So integrated business planning. It'd be great if you just, why is it that you think integrated business planning is so important, and how does it relate in your mind to
Yeah,
design and workforce planning and all these elements?
I couldn't come on Unpacking Organizations and not have a TLA, you guys. So IBP was my TLA. Integrated business planning. The reason that I think that it's important is having done two big corporate leadership roles where I was responsible for those integrated outcomes, and having been a consultant to organizations where those capabilities were disaggregated, it becomes really, really clear that organizations who've really got this pinned down, where the corporate strategy is understood, corporate strategy is translated into an operating model, whether you call that macro org design or operating model, whatever. But that then translates into what capabilities we need across our organization, whether that's humans or technology or partners, whatever, in order to execute against business outcomes. That then translates into a long range plan that says, this is what my workforce looks like today. Maybe I've got a long runway and I can spend some time on a build strategy, getting people and capabilities in place for an org design that I don't necessarily need to have finalized for 3 years. Or maybe I've got to start doing things like recruiting people today in that strategy space. But then all of that together ends up in these beautiful strategy documents that sit on people's shelves unless it integrates directly into operational planning where the money hits the road, right? So if I can't fund my strategy, then what's my strategy for? So I think that integration of org strategy work, operating model, organization design, long range strat planning into that direct relationship with finance to make sure that your next 12-month HR plan, your people plan, like all of the tactical things you're going to do, is funded. That's how you get this stuff done. And if it's not integrated, it becomes really, really hard. I was saying to Rupert just before we came on, one of the great things about my role at Insight 222 is I have direct access to 120 big organizations that can invest in this space. And I lead our special interest group for org design and strategy planning. And I put the vox pops out to the group on Tuesday to say, hey, I'm going on Unpacking Organizations. I've got a question for you. Who in the group has all of organization design, strategic workforce planning, operational planning tied to finance? Who's got all of that in this? Who's got all of those capabilities in the same team versus who doesn't? And I got a range of points of feedback back, including, "Gosh, I wish it was all together," or "Oh, we're not quite together, but we work really, really closely." But I think perhaps unsurprisingly, the two clients who came back saying like, "Yep, we're all together," in my view, are the clients that have these amazing case studies that can talk about going from boardroom corporate strategy to funded tactical planning and then measured outcomes of what that tactical planning has done so that they can take it back into the next strategy cycle. And I won't spoil anyone's thunder, but I believe maybe one of those clients is another guest this season, and maybe he's relabeled his team to something that sounds like something that we talk about on Unpacking Organizations. But I'll let him tell his story.
Well,
That
we
is,
can, yeah.
that's a
So
very good golden nugget or Easter egg for our listeners to find.
Tune in next time.
Thank you, Jordan. I have so many questions because this is such a music to our ears, or however we want to say it, that this is how it should be done, but
Mm,
we are not able to do it. Like, those out of 120 clients that you're talking
yeah,
to, they all want to do it, but they just are not able to. So, question that I have in a more practical way is that what are the prerequisites? What are some of the foundational work that you have to do in order to even get the buy-in from the organization or get that energy flowing in the organization to make this stick and work? Because there's
it,
too many downstream that you have to do anyways, but what is prerequisite?
it's so. I mean, I grew up in the people analytics space, right? So I'm always going to say, get your data house in order, because you need to have your data in order to make reliable decisions with it. But I think like step one for me is stepping away from what all of these independent processes are and just getting really clear about why we would have any of those processes in the first place. Our CEO at Inform used to enjoy winding executives up by starting a conversation about people strategy with, well, if you can afford to advertise and pray, why bother doing any of this work? And you kind of get it, right? Like, why are we having why are we having this conversation? Why do we need a strategy? Why then would we not put finance and HR and talent partners and operations people all around the same table if they're all working towards the same thing? So for me, I actually think it's a cultural first step rather than a nuts and bolts first step. And that's what's hard, right? Because, and I guess in work that I do, it's it's often a bit of a politically fraught place to be the data nerd, to be the strategy nerd in an HR leadership team, potentially who are longer tenured than you are, potentially who have better executive relationships than you do, and be the person in the room that says, mm, the insight that we have to work with might indicate that we would do something different to what that plan is. Um, and it's not with disrespect that I say that about HR leadership teams. Like it is just a reality. We are a newer function in the way that HR leadership teams operate. I think we are a newer function in HR in the way that businesses operate as well, right? We've evolved so much. We changed so much from about 2020 to where we are now. There's a whole lot of work that we need to do as an HR profession or wherever OP&A sits. I know that that's not necessarily an HR done and dusted, but like there's so much work for us to do with our business leaders to say, yo, this people strategy stuff, we don't do it because it's fun. It's actually really hard work, and it's not any different to your people strategy. I think was it maybe 2013, Laszlo Block is on record as posing this question about saying, well, do you make decisions about your people, arguably the most expensive and largest number of resources that you have, with the same rigor that you make decisions about finance, about equipment, about facilities, et cetera, et cetera? The answer to that question is still no. And I kind of have to wonder, like, what's our role as OP&A professionals to be educating other business professionals about going like, hey, it's important stuff. And even if we're just talking about things like a skills gap, yeah, like we can hire people from the market and that would be expensive. We can train people and that would take longer. But what if we just deployed a robot instead? What if we decided that that capability was necessary, but not the most important for us to have a differentiated outcome corporately? Like, there's all of these big, big, really valuable decisions that I don't know if business leaders expect the HR people that bring that content to them to be having those conversations with us. Because it's not about HR. It's about the way that this critical resource in organizations executes against business outcomes. And it's a different conversation to be having. And then you go and get all your data in order, and then you work out who's going to do the actual work, and then you work out what tools they need to have in order to get the work done. And then you work out what is the output of each of those phases and which of those processes, and how does that input to the next one, and make sure that everyone's happy with that. So I think the nuts and bolts I think have to come after that.
So Jordan, so to paraphrase, you're a Simon Sinek. You're at start with why.
Yeah.
Um, to answer Shradha's question, get the why, and if you don't have it all integrated, then things are going to fall through the cracks, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Function
you're
over
just going to
form.
waste a lot of time and effort,
Yeah.
and you won't achieve your strategy effectively. So it's the why, and what I'm inferring from what you're saying, but also what I see in the world is a lot of people don't buy into the why.
Yeah.
Either passive aggressive, so they say they do, which I think people often say they do, but with their actions they don't. So why
Mhm.
is that? Why, if it's so self-evident to the three of us and everyone else that's on here, and people always say to you, I've never heard anyone disagree verbally.
Exactly.
They all say yes, yes, yes. And you say it should be a capability that you have in-house, don't outsource, etc. They say yes, yes, yes. But with action, with budget, with FP&A gets 25% of the finance budget, and OP&A gets between 0 and 2%, with a
Mhm.
few exceptions. Those 2 out of 100. Um, so why is that? Do you think?
I mean, spitballing, but one has to wonder at that old adage of like what gets measured gets managed. What are we remunerated and rewarded for in corporate HR teams, or more broadly in corporate leadership teams? Something that in my consulting work and in my corporate roles, something that is difficult is having a business leader whose objectives are to produce and sell, to create more revenue, to connect with more customers, and they're measured on scorecards that are updated every quarter. If they're rewarded for short term quarterly performance behaviors, then it is exceedingly hard to get those business leaders to sit down and say, you know what, let's forget about all of these operations. Let's forget about the way that I'm getting all of these things done. Let's forget about the way that I'm going to give all of my team really excellent bonuses at the end of this year. And let's blue sky think about what might happen in the next 5 years, and then try to talk about scenarios as well. Holy whack. Like, it's really hard, and they're not rewarded for it. It's not built into the way that we measure the performance of these very, very senior, very, very competent, very, very clever business leaders. I do think there is something about the expectation of business leaders, the way we measure them and the way we reward them, which is a bit of a double-edged sword. It drives fantastic performance, but it does get in the way of folks like you and I wanting to go and say, hey, what if we don't replace anyone with automation and other forms of AI? But what if we gave everyone some form of AI that sped up all of their menial stuff and meant that they could go and do other interesting value created stuff. Like, that's a really challenging conversation to have when what you're focused on is Kaizen and lean and how do we take waste out of processes and how do we drive the top line up and the bottom line down. It's
Yeah. The next quarter.
exactly.
Yes.
And I do think it's that. And it's as a result, when that reflects into HR teams. If it's a muscle that you only use once, like imagine you did one bicep curl a year. Like
Yes.
that's going to be really, really, really hard work. You're not going to want to do it. You probably can't lift much because you've probably forgotten how to do it. It's
And
been so long since you did
you'll
it.
have crazy muscle pain 2
Exactly.
weeks afterwards.
So is it any wonder that it's tough for HR teams who might only need to go and do this once a year, once every second year, that it's not a muscle that they've had and that it therefore
Yeah.
is kind of tricky? Because of course
And
it is.
Jordan, as you're talking, I'm thinking that your integrated business planning is amazing for the HR professionals to come together and start thinking about this differently and have a different muscle to it altogether, different kind of conversation. Else should be on the table, or who else HR should be activating within the organization to become their best friends? Because then it becomes very siloed. And, like, as you're saying, you don't have accountability partners as you go to the
Mm,
gym. And
yeah.
therefore, like, who are those accountability partners for HR in this journey?
I mean, certainly in my own experience and in research that we'd published pretty regularly, finance has got to sit, if not in number one position on that list of who you've got to be friends with, they've got to be in pole position. Like it's like finance has got to be really, really high. Because as we say, like all of that strategy work can happen. And if finance can't afford to fund it in the first year, then you might as well have not done it. So having finance sitting at the same table. I think we talk a lot about how organization planning, organization design, workforce planning, strategy isn't an HR process, it's a business process. That's harder said than done, but I do think there's got to be that the holy trinity, right? Of the people responsible for your people in HR or talent or whoever it is that those conversations are had by, the people that are responsible for funding it, your finance partner, and the business leader who's responsible for executing on those business outcomes. And that might mean that you bring in people in shared services and operations because you're going to need them to change what they do in order to change processes and structures to get things done faster or better or at a different cost. It might mean that you bring technology in order to change the way that you get things done. But those kind of extra players I would see as extra players. It's a decision that we make about which part of our organization design and operating model gets things done. So I think there's that people because you can't do it without finance because they've got to pay for it, and then the person responsible I think need to sit in that the holy trinity
Yeah,
relationship to make those
yeah.
decisions together.
And so what I hear you is that, like, I'm just thinking out loud, is because these work happens so much in silo, it becomes very difficult to integrate it. So the first cultural perhaps shift that can happen is that elevate this group as a functional group or a project team that
Mm-hmm.
does this work, so that nobody's just restricted to their own silos, but they're coming together to do this, and that starts to give some way or some momentum to this work, rather than expecting somebody will bring all of this together, because not everybody will have Jordan in their
Yeah,
in their organization who thinks broad and bring all of them together.
I think yes, I think there could be a shortcut.
Mm,
Um, and I have used it successfully at least once. And that shortcut is to mandate what the single processes are with your best buds in finance. So, and like this is, I'm probably revealing too much about my IBM history, but process mapping, not the sexiest thing in the world, but super, super useful, right? If you can say that in our operational planning process, a key input is the people long range plan for business unit X, and the meetings, the process steps in that operational planning step have your business partner, your HR business partner, your finance business partner, and whatever your business label is. Are you a cost center owner, a profit center owner, a business unit leader, whatever it is, but the decision maker, each step of it needs to have those three players in it, and the operational plan isn't signed off until all three of those people sign it off. Like, if you can backdoor your way into creating an elevated space for the Holy Trinity to hang out by mandating process, then why not? Like, if you can support cultural change by not needing to directly address the cultural change, why not, I say? And it
Oh,
works.
I feel that processes have such a big impact on the culture, mostly negatively than positively. But how can we use a process to build a positive culture? Yeah,
Mm,
Having a
yeah,
process that brings people together
exactly.
with a common purpose
Yeah,
to solve a problem, given that
yeah,
they've all got, they will have to help execute that process anyway. You know, the
yeah,
decision at the back end of it in different ways. You're solving a lot of the communication problems and the implementation problems down the line by aligning up front.
exactly. And it's,
Um,
I think, thinking about the integration points as well, right? Like leaning into some of that process stuff and being able to say to a talent team, like, yo, what is going to be most useful, in what format, at what level of granularity, what do you need from the strategic planning cycle that is going to enable you to meaningfully adjust tactical plans across the next 12 months? Hey, finance, what do you need, in what format, at what level of granularity, in order to have those conversations about how we're going to work out funding what this long range strategy is? Because some of it's going to be building, and some of it's going to be buying, and some of it's going to be botting. And are we up to 9Bs at the last? I think it was 9Bs the last time I updated myself on that. But like, being really clear about what would support integration and what would take away from integration, and just do the first one.
so just related to just a thought that's going through my mind is what two thoughts. One is the the capability, the competencies of the leader of the OP&A function is one. What does that person need to have in the wheelhouse to be able to execute this role effectively? And the other is just stepping back and thinking about an organization, a large organization, and how much coordination needs to take place. So, because we talk about economies of scale, but there's also diseconomies. And as you get
Mm,
bigger and bigger and bigger, the cost of coordination just grows.
yeah.
And so, to be good at scaling and coordinating becomes fundamental before that, overweighs you. And um, I've forgotten his name now. The famous Israeli, he's written the book *Sapiens*.
Oh,
mm,
Yuval Noel
He-
Harari.
yeah, so
yeah.
he talks about in a second book, um, those that coordinate best win, and he's got lots and lots of examples. So, for instance, the Bolsheviks, apparently they were tiny. They should not have taken over the whole of Russia and then the Soviet, but they coordinated very, very well.
Mm,
And so, your ability to coordinate is fundamental for you, for your success. And so, I think, Jordan, what you're talking about is a leader who can help coordinate along a shared process. And yes, if you can process map it, great. But the key thing is
mm,
doing that work so it is integrated, so that your strategy is integrated through down to your operational plan, down to your budget, down to where you invest, down to the sorts of people that you need to hire, down to the kind of training you need to give. And I often talk about it as systems thinking, and it's the
yeah.
same approach. It's systems thinking, it's integrated thinking. And so for the leader of an OP&A function has to have that capability.
Yep. It's one of my favorite one of the favorite words that I learned moving from Australia to London and then working across Europe was the idea of a capability that is transversal. It's a word that you only ever hear in Europe, in my experience. But like that idea that actually there is a separate and distinct skill set that is the skill set that is transversal across all of those different deep deep capabilities. And so in the circles that I move, we talk about deep, deep, deep experts that lead talent organizations, deep, deep experts that lead reward organizations. There is a different wide expert, and it's that person who leads the things that aren't specifically talent or reward, but they cut across all of it in strategy, in coordination, in tying out to finance, in all of that sort of stuff. And I love it. Like that transversal skill set is I think exactly what you're talking about. And it's the I can't think who I'm now quoting, so forgive me if I misquote, but I was interviewing a portfolio leader who is responsible for people analytics, but also people strategy and the AI strategy and digital experience and lots and lots of stuff across the HR organization in his company. And he was saying, well, like, yeah, of course I'm responsible for those things. Why would you ask a reward leader whose deep, deep, deep expertise is on reward structures, how we motivate people, how we benchmark to the market, how we make sure that we're equitable and fair in the way that we pay people for the same job? How is it fair that you ask that person to lead AI strategy? I'm not a deep, deep reward expert, so I can be across all of these things. So of course that's where that responsibility lives. And it was such a breath of fresh air having that conversation. It was like, oh yeah, actually, our skills are distinct and they are separate and they are different and they are of equal value in driving integrated and differentiated outcomes, because it's about driving the way that we use insight about people and data into the way that we make decisions about what we do, whether that's long range talent strategy or paying for it or anything else. It's all about integration, baby. IBM.
Oh, Jordan, we can continue to talk for hours, but of course, we are coming to the end of our podcast now. So we usually wrap up with two things. One is a tool and one is a trap. So, what is usually a tool that you over index on, or your favorite go to tool as you do this integrated business planning? And what is one trap that you would like our listeners to be aware of?
One tool I would say is probably in trying to adjust that culture space is thinking about the way that you need to meet your stakeholders. I was given advice years ago that as a person with a specialty, you need to meet others at the place that they are in order to bring them on a journey with you. And I think a really effective way of doing that is really understanding the audiences that you're working with, understanding their comfort with the overall content that you're talking about and their comfort with the technical aspects that you need them to get comfortable with, and plotting them on a bit of I'm a consultant, right? So plotting them on a 2 by 2, but then really tailoring the way that you take that message of integration to all of those audiences in a way that's really going to resonate. You know, you don't necessarily need to take a super financy message to a leader of talent, but you probably should take a super financy message to a leader of FP&A. So I'd say lean into really understanding those stakeholder groups and tailoring the way that you communicate with them in order to support the culture change. And then the trap, I have worked for software vendors, and so I say this with love, but I would say don't move existing processes to a new software vendor without taking a step back and thinking about whether those processes are actually in service of your overall purpose. And I think
Simplify before you digitize.
exactly. And I think it's a trap that I've worked in organizations that they fell into. It's a trap that I've tried to help people avoid and they still fell into. But
Yeah.
I think we've reached the stage now, particularly now that we're not just talking about process technologies in the cloud, we're talking about really rapidly changing and advancing artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Get your data in order, make sure that it's the right process, and then pick a technology that's going to support your purpose and your outcomes, not the other way around.
Fantastic.
Nice. Love it.
Well, thank you so much, Jordan, for coming on our show and sharing your thoughts with us. I'm sure our listeners learned a lot. I learned a lot. And thank you for being our guest.
Thank you
Rupert,
for having me.
Yeah, thanks,
thank
Jordan,
you so
and thanks for
much.
your passion as well, because it
Yes,
oozes
we could
out.
feel
Yeah,
it.
Yeah, it's important. So and so thank you, and I'll be sure to pass on your regards to my brother Marcus.
please do.
Yeah, Shradha,
Thank you
and
all.
you keep well.
Yes, you as well, Rupert. Until next time.
Until next time.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.